Hey guys, what's up? So in this video, I will show you how you can create a completely new material from scratch. In the previous video, we've learned that here in Enscape, we can create automatically some materials basically by using specific keywords. But of course, if we want to work in a more professional way, we now have to create more materials and also make some adjustments so that we have a nice overall image. Before creating a material from scratch, it's important to understand that many times we can have a nice material by basically making a few adjustments to the existing ones. However, sometimes starting from scratch is the best option. So, for example, if we take a look at this scene, you can see that there are many materials that were created with the traditional SketchUp textures, for example, this floor here, and we could try to make some few adjustments and see how it looks. So I can open here my material editor, I can use my paint bucket tool, and with the Alt key I can select this floor material, and once it's selected we could basically, for example, reduce the roughness, and you can see that basically by changing this parameter we have a much more interesting floor than we had before. However, the final result is still not so sophisticated because we are using here a texture that is actually a texture from SketchUp and the quality is not so good. So many times, instead of trying to make adjustments to the existing materials here in SketchUp, we can start a material completely from zero. So let's try to create a completely new material and use it here in this wall. And I'll try to create a material that simulates brick. And to create a new material, we have to do it in the traditional manner. So we can explore here the Materials tab, and we can click this button here called Create Material. And when we create a new material here in SketchUp, it normally uses the last map that we've selected, so that's why we can see here the wood map, but we can change it, of course. And I'll call this material brick. And then to change this texture, we can click here, and now we can choose the texture that we want. However, before picking any kind of texture, it's important to understand that when we are working with Enscape, we normally use many textures and not just one like we do with SketchUp. So normally for the color, we need to choose an albedo map. And if you are used to working with other renderers, this kind of map is also called base map or diffuse, and it basically controls the main color of the material. We also need to choose a height map, which simulates a kind of depth in the material. And in Enscape, we can work with bump maps or normal maps or even displacement maps. And once we apply, you will understand the difference of each one of them. Also, we need to work with a reflection map to control the roughness of the material, making some parts of the material more reflective than others. And since we need a lot of maps, it's very important that you have your own library with different maps that can help you to create your own material. So there are many websites that you can explore and download these maps. This is actually one that I use a lot, but you can explore other options. And it's very important to search for PBR materials, which are basically the materials that are created with these different maps that we've just seen. So here I can click to explore the PBR materials, and you can notice that when you select any kind of material here, for example, I'll click here this wood material, you can download the material, which is basically a collection of different maps. You can see that we have here normal maps and roughness maps as we've just seen. But probably there are also some other maps that Enscape still doesn't support. You can see that there are different sizes, and of course, if you download a bigger file, it will probably have a better quality. For this exercise, you can use the 2K JPEG, but actually you can explore the maps in the folder that I've provided. So returning to SketchUp, I was just selecting the main texture, which will control the color of our material. And in this folder that contains the brick material, I have already organized the maps that we need with their names. So we can choose the albedo map, that's the color map and will be the most important map to use. So I'll click here to open it and OK. So this is actually the traditional way of creating materials in SketchUp, and we chose here the map that is responsible for the color. I will then click OK, and here in Enscape we can see that we have our just created brick material. And now I can already apply it to the wall. So I'll use here my paint bucket tool, and I'll basically click here in our wall, and we have now our brick applied. But you can already notice that the mapping is really strange. So we can correct this here in SketchUp, clicking in Edit, and we can increase here the size of the map. So I can try, for example, 3 meters per 3 meters. And I guess now it's quite okay. And if we check our Enscape window here, we can see that the material is already working, but it doesn't have any kind of depth, and it doesn't have also any kind of reflection. So I have to go on and continue editing my material. So now I will explore my Enscape material editor, and I can see that the albedo map was placed here. You can click here and we have this preview. Here we can also make some kind of addition to the map. For example, we can change its brightness to make it darker or brighter. We could also change the mapping here instead of changing here in SketchUp. So we could also try here other sizes if we like, but I'll go back to the 3 per 3, okay. And here we can also rotate our map, which can actually be very helpful in certain situations. Okay, I'll return to the original value. Here we could also change the map. So if we click here, we could choose another map for the albedo, but that's not the case. And if we click here, we go back to the main configurations. And here we could also make some further editing. For example, we could choose a color that would be overlaid in the original texture color. So this can be useful if we want to change the color of the map. And if we don't want to interfere, we can just choose the white one. Okay. And we can also reduce this image fade, which will fade the image until we can't see anything. And then here we can see the color that is selected up here. So I'll return to the original value, which is 100%. And we can also delete the map by clicking here in this cross button. And we can also change the image directly if we like, by clicking here in this folder and choosing another image for the albedo color. I'll close this window and I'll go on with my edition. So up to now we just have the main color of our material. And if we explore our next component here called Hive Map, this is where we can actually simulate the depth of the material. So if our material has some holes, some roughness, or any kind of irregularity in its surface, this is where we can configure it. So there are actually 3 kinds of maps that we can use here: the bump map, the normal map, and the displacement map. Let's try first with the bump map. So I'll keep this option selected. I'll click here in this folder and notice that we could try to use our albedo map as a bump map, but it normally works better if we use another kind of map. So I'll click here in this folder. And normally the bump map is a black and white image. So we could use, for example, this one here. And before choosing, I will just open it to take a look. And when we use this kind of map to simulate the bump, Enscape considers the white areas of the image as parts of the surface that will create a kind of volume, and the black areas will be parts of the surface that will actually move inwards as if they were sinking towards the center of the geometry. But when we use the bump option, this is actually just a simulation and we don't have any kind of geometry being created. So I'll close here this window and I'll choose this option called Brick Bump and Displacement. And if you check now our wall, you can see that we already have this kind of depth, and we can change the power of this bump here in the amount. So if we move the slider to the right, probably the effect will become even more noticeable. Okay, and to understand better what's going on here, we can also fade the albedo map. So if I move the slider to the left, then the albedo map will kind of disappear, and we will still have the effect of the bump map controlling the height of the material. So this is actually a good way to check the real effect of the bump, and we can even exaggerate to see how it's working. Okay, so I will once again set the value here of the fade to 100. So we have our albedo map once again. I can decrease a little bit the amount, and we can see that this is a very good option, especially because it doesn't really create new geometry, so it doesn't consume a lot of memory. Another option to simulate the height map would be to use maps that are called normal maps. So I'm going to change here the type, and the map that we've just chosen doesn't work with the normal map option. So we have to select another image. I'll click here in the folder. And now I'm going to select the third image, which is called brick normal. And the normal maps, they have this kind of blue color, and they are maps that are able to store more information than the black and white images. So probably the result will be a bit better. So I'll click here and open it. And now we can see that it's working. And once again, we can increase the intensity so that we can see how the normal map is working. And once again, we have a nice effect with this simulation of depth. We can also decrease the image fade, and we will see that it's working quite fine, but I'll return to 100% since I'm already happy with the result. And the third option here would be the displacement map, which is actually a very interesting option, but we have to be careful because this option actually displaces the geometry. So it can consume a lot of memory, and depending on the graphic card, it may not work properly. So when we use the displacement map, we once again need a black and white image. So I'll click once again here in the folder to change the image. And I'll use once again the image that we used with the bump option. So I'll select it and click here. Okay. And you can see that the effect is very intense. So we can really see the volume of the bricks. And of course, we can also control the amount. So maybe 3 is too much, so we can reduce a little bit, and then we'll have a softer result. Okay. So this is also an interesting option that you can use in certain materials that you need. But I guess that for this exercise, the normal map or the bump map was already fine. So I'll return to the normal map option. And once again, I will change the image to the normal map image. Okay. And I'll just increase the amount. And I'm quite happy here with this result. Okay, so the last component that we need to configure are the reflections. And here in the reflections component, we could work in the same way as we did with the other components by inserting maps to control the reflections of the materials. But we could also control the reflections through these 3 parameters here. And to explain them a little bit better, I'll return to the example of the armchair. So let's take a look again at that red material that we've created. I will use the Alt key to once again configure this material. Okay, let's see our armchair here in the rendered window. And when we try to control the reflections through these parameters, we have to remember which kind of behavior they are actually controlling. So one parameter that we've changed was the roughness, and when we decreased this roughness value, we started to get more reflections in our material. So actually the roughness controls the level of irregularity of the surface. So if we increase this roughness value, which means that our materials are more rough, they tend to produce a more diffuse reflection. So the reflection will actually be less noticeable. And once we decrease this roughness value, our surface will get more regular and smooth. And in this way, it will produce more reflections. So if you need more reflections, the first step is to decrease the roughness value. And you will see now that we can see the sky in a very clear way here in our chair. And underneath the roughness parameter, we have the metallic parameter. And when we increase the metallic parameter, our first impression is that the material is becoming even more reflective, and it's actually happening. But another phenomenon that is being simulated here, that is a metallic characteristic, is that the reflection starts to become red because the material is red. So if we drag the slider till the end, you will notice that now the reflections will have less color from the elements that they are actually reflecting, like the sky and the grass, for example, and they will produce this very red effect. And if we choose any other color, for example yellow, you will see that the effect is also the same, and the reflections, they are a bit yellow. So I'll return to the red material, okay? And I will also decrease this metallic value so it's not so strong. And the last parameter here, called specular, it actually controls the variation of the reflection based on the angle that we are looking at. So this is an effect called Fresnel that most of the materials have. So basically, if we increase this specular value, you will notice that the reflections will appear to be stronger, because now Enscape is not considering the difference of power of the reflection based on the angle. So if you would like to make your surface even more reflective, you can increase this value. However, it will probably look a little bit artificial because most of the materials have this Fresnel effect, and the reflections will be a little bit different depending on the angle that we are in our scene. So I normally suggest that we don't change this parameter and we can leave it at 50%, but of course you can change it if you wish. Okay, so now let's return to our wall and take a look at our brick material once again. And I'll select this material here in my list once again. Okay, and here, if we like, we could use these controls that I've just shown. For example, we can change the roughness so that our material is more reflective. We can change the metallic value also so that it has this more metallic behavior. And we could also change the specular. So this would be one way to work with this material. But normally we can reach more interesting results if we work with textures. So for example, here we could use a texture that can control the roughness. So I'll click here in this folder. And you can use this map that I've provided called brick roughness. And if we take a look, it looks like the bump map. So we have some darker bricks and some brighter ones. So I can close here and I can select the image now. And once we choose this image, you can now see that we cannot control anymore the value of the roughness because this is actually being controlled by the map. So now you can see that some bricks are more reflective than others, and this is happening according to the map that we've just placed here. And we can of course change, for example, the metallic value, which is too high, so I'll decrease it a little bit. So now our material is becoming more interesting. And if we would like to check the reflection in a better way, we can of course also decrease the fade of the image, and here you can see exactly what's going on. So some bricks are more reflective than others. Now I'll return with the previous value, and I will also decrease more the metallic value because this is not a metallic surface. And depending on the material that you are simulating, you can also use different reflection maps, for example, to simulate dirt surfaces, or maybe if your material is wet, we can also use different kinds of roughness maps to produce these effects. For example, if I change this image here, I'll click here in this folder and I'll choose this dirt map that I've provided. We are now getting a different result, and we can see that this map that I've just inserted here is a map with this kind of black areas simulating dirt. And since I've inserted in the reflection component, now the reflections are being controlled by this variation of black and white. And this can produce a very natural material effect. And we can simulate, for example, dirt in this case, but we could also simulate a wet material. And if I even return to my materials configuration here, and if we increase our metallic value, for example, and also the specular, we will of course notice this effect in a much stronger way, because now the reflections are even more intense, and we can see in a very clear way how the map is actually changing the aspect of the material. But I'll return to the original values here and also the specular. And for this image, I will be actually using the former map. So I'll basically click here in this folder. And here I will once again choose the brick roughness map, because I think that for this image it's more suitable. Okay, so we've created our first material from scratch, and we used different maps to assemble this material, and we've also understood a little bit better what each component does here in the Enscape material editor.